One of the things that if you lead a COPE group, or in fact if you run any kind of a group parenting program, or probably any kind of a group at all, even a work group or a task-oriented group or a team, there are stages that groups go through, and they're fairly predictable, and they're absolutely critical to understand as a leader. Otherwise, groups can become really confusing and difficult to understand. So we like to use a model that considers the first stage of a COPE group a stage of engagement. And engagement is a stage where people come and they try to decide whether or not this is the right group for them. And they try to decide whether they have anything common with the people in the group. And that's a really important first couple of session task for the group, is to decide whether to participate or not. And we often deal with that on information night, and the leader deals with it by thinking about what are some of the similarities that parents have, and pointing out that some of you are here without your partners, and it sounds like there's a number of parents who have younger kids, 4 or 5, and a number of you have adolescents, and it sounds like chores and homework are a challenge for most folks. But the leader's job is just to point out some of the similarities that create that sense of shared concerns and things in common. And that engagement stage is often a very positive stage for the group. Parents have a sense that they have things in common. It's so nice to talk to other parents. They see they're not alone in this. And it's generally a happy stage in the group, and you'll enjoy it as a group leader. They like you as a leader. They're positive and enthusiastic. They have lots of hopes about the group, and it's a positive stage. As they get to know each other and as they get to see what the group is really all about, though, they start to share more information, they talk more, they express their views, and they realize that they don't agree all the time, and they may not agree with everybody. Maybe they don't agree with somebody in their subgroup. More likely, they don't agree with you as a leader. And differentiation is a stage where you begin to get a sense of some tension in the group. And you only get to that stage if people feel that they're part of the group and they've made a commitment to being in the group, and they open up a little bit. Then they start to find out that they don't always disagree. So engagement is a happy stage, and differentiation is a little bit more of a challenge. And that often sets the occasion for what we in the COPE program call the third session revolt. And it doesn't always happen on the third session, but usually round about there, you'll be going along and you'll be thinking, what a wonderful group this is, and it's sort of, I'm really positive, and the parents are happy, and then somebody will say, well, Dr. Cunningham, my son did this. What should I have done? And Dr. Cunningham will say, well, how many other folks here have had something like that happen? People will raise their hands, and what are some of the things that people have found helpful in that situation? And that parent will say, no, I want to know what you think. And so they'll challenge one of the fundamental rules of the group, and that is that this is a problem-solving group, and you're here as a facilitator. Or they may decide that they don't really like to practice and role play, that we just want to talk about things, or they want to have a discussion about an issue that's completely unrelated to the curriculum. So the third session of revolt is a time when parents feel comfortable enough and confident enough, and they start to feel enough ownership of the group that they're prepared to challenge each other, to disagree with each other, or to more likely to challenge you as a leader. And the third session revolt, this stage of a group's development, is not unlike adolescence. You've done your job as a parent, and adolescents are confident and they have a good relationship with you, then they start to challenge you, and they start to try to differentiate themselves. And it's a kind of a rocky stage. And your job as a leader is not unlike your job as a parent in that situation. You need to listen and try to understand what it is that the group is saying, but at the same time you need to maintain some boundaries. The program starts at 7 and it ends at 9. You're here to facilitate problem-solving discussions, but you're not really in a position, because you don't know the kids in this group, you don't know the individual families, to be giving personal advice. So, hello, Bill. Come on in. So we're all working and you're not. Perfect. You've got a whole bunch of ties in your closet that I'd be happy to wear. So the third session revolt is a difficult time, and when a group that has really been positive turns and challenges you, it doesn't make any difference how much experience you have in the field. It doesn't make any difference how many parenting programs you've run. It is very upsetting to you as a leader, and you'll go home and you'll be up half the night, and you will not look forward to the next session, and you'll come back waiting for this group to eat you alive, and they've happily moved on if you've handled it well. So this is a stage that groups go through. It's a stage that virtually all working groups go through, and you should anticipate it. It has nothing to do with you as a leader. My most experienced, most supportive, most sensitive leaders always have a third session revolt. But it will be difficult. So it's a stage in the group that means that they're confident enough to challenge you, to disagree about things, to express different points of view. But it's difficult. The last stage is kind of the advanced working group. And once people find that they can challenge you and they can disagree and the thing doesn't fall apart and you don't kick them out, then they move into a stage in the group's development where now they can deal with the more difficult issues that you're going to begin to deal with in the 5th and 6th and 7th session. When you start to deal with transitions and compliance and consequences, those are more difficult issues, and the group is in a better position to discuss that confidently. So there's some stages that groups go through that are fairly predictable but important to understand. The bad news is, even though you've gone through a third session revolt and you survive that, and things seem to be moving along, it doesn't mean that groups don't cycle back to that. So every once in a while you may have a kind of a mini revolution in your group, but it's an inevitable stage in which groups challenge you. Some people who do group work call it a storming stage, and it's a challenging, difficult time, but it's predictable. Now, one of the things that we have tried to do is to structure the workshop in such a way that we have about 5 people per table. And we did that for a number of reasons. But one of the reasons is that people in groups play a number of very different but very important roles. You may notice that in the early part of the session, I would ask for response to an attributional question. Say, what's that parent really saying to her son in doing that? And there'd be some silence, and you'd wait a little bit, and you were thinking, well, should I say something or not? And somebody always raises their hand, and it's almost always the same couple of people. And they kind of see that the discussion needs to get going, so they'll raise their hand and start the discussion. And when you sit down at your group, you may notice that when you started talking about the errors on the tape, that there was 1 or 2 people who got the conversation going. And we call those sociable members. And this isn't a personality, it's really just a task. Somebody needs to start the conversation, somebody needs to get the discussion going. And sociable members do that. And your tendency is to sort of say, well, I wish I had a whole group full of sociable members. But you probably wouldn't want that because you wouldn't get a lot of work done. They have a great time, people would enjoy themselves, but you wouldn't get a lot of work done. Structural members, on the other hand, sometimes I went around and I heard people saying, well, what was that parent talking about in the tape? And somebody would say, well, it was this. And people would say, well, what are we supposed to be doing? And well, I think he wants us to do this. And they provide the group with some structure. And you guys are a really polite group, but some groups are really noisy. And you're trying to get them to quiet down. And you're saying, let me hear from just one person at a time, just the subgroup leader. And you'll hear somebody in one of the groups saying, shh, shh, trying to help you out. And so structural members oftentimes pay attention to the task, they pay attention to what's expected, they pay attention to the rules of the group, and they're helpful, and they balance the sociable members. One of the things that's really, I think, important from a service-providing perspective to large groups is that it enables people to participate in a lot of different ways. And there's some parents who like to talk, they like to discuss issues, they like to explore things, and there are other parents who prefer to listen. And you've probably noticed in your groups that there are people that are quieter, they listen, they participate in the group, they'll comment once in a while, but they're quieter members, and we sometimes call them reluctant members. Not reluctant that they want to be there, but they're just a quieter member of the group. They might be a little bit more introverted, but they prefer to interact in a different way. And one of the things that a group of a reasonable size affords is an opportunity for parents to participate in different ways. And in fact, you need a sociable member or two, you need a structural member of two to keep them on task. Sociable members like to talk, and reluctant members prefer to listen. So you get a nice balance, and you get that somewhere around a group size of 5. Now there's another member, usually in a workshop, we would have noticed them by now, but they're divergent members. And divergent members oftentimes appear during the differentiation stage of the group's development. And they're often the ones that, in a sense, lead the third session revolt. And they're the ones that will challenge you and say, well Dr. Cunningham, we don't agree with that. And you might think that they're responsible for the third session revolt, but divergent members are typically articulating a view that a lot of other parents in the group share. And they've gone out on a limb, in a sense. They've taken some risks in challenging you or expressing those views. And so you have to be very careful to not misinterpret that. It's a role. Now supposing we had a divergent member. Maybe Greg was a divergent member. I can't imagine him ever being a divergent member, but I saw him after the group and I said, Greg, I think individual therapy might be a little better here. And I kicked him out of the group. Never do that, of course. But what would happen if we did that? What would happen if the divergent member wasn't there? Somebody else would take responsibility for that role. So it's not a particular person, it's somebody who has stepped up to share with you as a leader some of the things that other members in the group are probably thinking. And divergent members are really important because they'll challenge and they'll raise questions and they'll make the group work on more difficult issues. And so a good group is a group that has a balance of these kinds of roles. So that's why we try to have about 5 people per subgroup. You could have more, you could have 7, but then there isn't as much time to participate. If you were going around doing a homework review, it would take 7 people, a minimum of 7 minutes to get through the homework review. So 5 gives more opportunity for participation. It's about the minimum number that you need. Okay, questions, anything about that? Right. You will have, one of the questions that we're sometimes asked is, how many people do you need to run a COPE group? And for a lot of years, we actually ran this as an individual family program. We ran with individual couples. And we showed videos, we went through most of the same process. So you could actually run the COPE program with an individual family. A lot more opportunity to explore their homework. You could probably run it in an hour. But it can be done. And you can run it with a small group. So say only 5 people came out, then I'd probably just have one group, and I'd probably join the group. So you can run the program with smaller numbers. The larger groups, I think you can see, generate a lot more ideas during problem solving. They typically will handle a complicated situation much more easily than a smaller group. Okay, that's a really good question. Once the COPE group starts, then it's a closed group. And if parents didn't make it to information night, then we probably will let them join on the first actual working session. But once we start session one, then it's a closed group. Parents, we try to sequence the start of programs. So let's say we start one on the 1st of October, and then if we're running 2 COPE groups, we might start the next one a week later. And if we're running 3 COPE groups, we might start the next one a week later, so that when inevitably parents find out about it and the group's already started, we say, well, there's another one that'll be starting in a couple of days, or 2 weeks from now there's another start date. So we try to stage the sequence to deal with that. But once the group starts, the group is closed. That's a good question. Yes. Yes. There are lots of models in our field of open kinds of groups. To run the manualized programs that have a curriculum where on session 1 you work on these strategies, and session 2 it's a little bit harder to have that. I mean, you can imagine that. But you also have group processes where if somebody has not been a part of the group's development, then it's more difficult for them to join, and groups are sometimes not as welcoming to members who have not been there at the start. Yes?
I recognize the value of why it would be important to do it in a group structure, obviously with the therapeutic values of group and factors that contribute to group success. But has there been any research done with regards to doing it as you suggested with individual families, if that's successful, if there's been any progress? Because that's kind of where I'm seeing that maybe our families might benefit if we can do it on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah. In some of the systematic reviews, people have looked at whether programs are run as groups or individuals, and I don't think the results are consistent on that. There are some advantages to working individually. Certainly you can tailor it more, you can focus more specifically on parenting issues. There's some advantages to running in groups where you have it's oftentimes easier to come up with solutions to complex problems. There's a lot of support and networking, and the process of change is really influenced very positively by a group. So individuals are sometimes actually more difficult to work with than large groups. Most of our leaders, when we first started running large groups, had done individual parent training for years and years and years, and once they started running large groups, they said, we don't ever want to go back and try to do it individually. It's just so much easier with a group that can do the problem solving and provide the work and deal with differences of opinion and help parents out who are stuck and things like that. So the problem in systematic reviews that look at programs done individually versus those that were done as a group is that oftentimes they were done with different populations and different sampling and different approaches, and so there just isn't enough literature. We did in the trial that I showed you, the 1995 trial, there was an arm of the trial that was an individual parenting program, and then there was a large group parenting program. But there were a lot of other differences as well, and the large group, of course, outperformed the individual program, but there were other differences as well, I think, could have counted for that. So, advantages to group. Oftentimes in service-providing organizations, groups provide a way of getting service to people. We in our province, we often use large group COPE programs as an option for parents while they're waiting for children's mental health services. So they've been referred, there may be a wait time of 6 months, and one of the options that they have would be to get involved in a parenting skills group and build some skills, work on their relationship with their kids in preparation. So large groups have some advantage just in terms of service availability. Yes?
Do you have a sense of, what's your sense of what the active component might be in terms of any particular program or the group process? Do you think it's like the resources that other parents bring to it that makes the group more effective than perhaps individual, or?
That's a really good question. In a problem-solving group like a COPE program, the advantage of the group is the ability to look at a tape, for example, and see a variety of things that have gone wrong, and to understand that from a number of different perspectives. You heard groups say, well, there was a tone of voice and, you know, some of the things that parent was thinking, and you know, they weren't in the same room with their child, and so groups are just really good for problem-solving purposes. And groups are really good for providing support to parents who are struggling and working on difficult things. Parents will say, you know, my son used to do the same thing, and you know, you just hang in there. You know, you'll get through this. And so there's networking and altruistic opportunities and things. So certainly there's an advantage in terms of problem solving. There's an advantage in terms of support and networking. I also think there's an advantage to group in terms of attitude change, is that when parents look at a situation and they think, well, you know, that's probably a situation the parent should just ignore and not get into an argument about. And some parents have a real hard time with that, but when they perceive that a lot of other parents feel that way, and they listen to the rationales that parents use for proposing that, that's very influential. So if you think about some of probably the best model empirically of change is a model which suggests that normative influences play a really important role. So, so parents influence each other in important ways. But you know, individually with parents, a chance to practice with their own child, a bug in the ear, is a really powerful set of teaching strategies. Sheila Iberg's parent-child interaction training program relies heavily on that kind of individual work. And there's some real advantages to that in cases where families have really, really difficult kids. Yes?
I noticed that you are, because I'm not a clinician, I noticed that you are referring to many authors or and researchers, search work. Do you have a bibliography somewhere that we could access, that I can access?
In the manual,
Yes.
there's quite an extensive reference section to articles on most of the things that I've referred to.
Okay.
I think most of the things that I've referred to are in the reference section of the manual.
Thank
So there's an introductory chapter in the manual that goes through the background of large group parenting programs and goes through some of the research and some of the theory that we use. And they're all in the reference section.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for using technical language. I'm kind of a researcher. That's all I know how to do. Okay, these are really good questions. Yes?
What is the key difference between the child group and the adolescent group that you run with the parents? I'm assuming the modeling, all of that is the same. Is it the
Yes.
skills development that's different?
Most of the skills are exactly the same. So we work on attending, we work on ignoring, really important skill with adolescents, and cognitive, kind of self-control, anger management for parents. We work on transitional warnings and when then, really important with adolescents. We work on planning ahead, really important for adolescents because young kids, some parents can get away with a more didactic tactic. It's not a particularly good way to parent, probably not good from a developmental or a longitudinal perspective, but sometimes they can get away with it. But once kids get to be adolescents, then you really do have to engage in a more collaborative approach to discussing issues. You have to be prepared to compromise. You have to be prepared to listen. And so the planning ahead that we've done in the early stages of the program that we're doing here tonight is a critical stage with adolescents. So, and then monitoring is a big issue. So we spend a lot of time on the issue of monitoring, just knowing where kids are going, who they're hanging around with, what they're up to, what time they're coming home at night. And of course that requires a good relationship. You don't get that by questioning kids in an authoritarian way. You get that by building up a good relationship with kids. So the strategies are almost all the same. I mean, that's an advantage of parenting, but the situations are typically more heated. Adolescents are often much more difficult to deal with. They're like adults, and they require respectful, collaborative approaches that are new for some parents. The ideal thing, we think, would be to start when your kids are infants and take a parenting program that works on attachment and build up a good good working relationship with your child and, take coping with toddler behavior and start dealing with some good strategies for managing transitions and structure, and take the 3 to 12-year-old version of the program, work on some of the strategies we've been working here, and then everything changes. It's a new ball game when kids hit adolescence, and so to have a chance to sit down and think through the adolescent years. And when you think about all the education that we do in our society for virtually anything that people want to do, we do so little for parenting, which is really the most critical task that any of us will probably ever do. Craig?
What strategy do you use in the group if you see someone who perhaps might need some additional help in dealing with some of the parenting or the issues, whether it's for themselves or their child?
Okay, that's a really good question. Is that in a large group, now you don't have the opportunity to get to know people in depth in a large group. This is really more akin to like a classroom in a way, and you don't know their individual kids. You hear bits and pieces. The question is, what do you do if a family is having a lot of difficulty? One of the things that we do is I mentioned it yesterday, is to offer a little bit more intensive version of the program, COPE Plus, and would be to speak to that parent and say, if you're interested, it sounds like you have a really challenging son there. We have an additional opportunity to work on some skills that you might find to be helpful. So that would be one option, would be to give them an opportunity to do that. We do it individually. Yeah, we do it individually. Sometimes we know those families. They're referred by a children's mental health provider, for example, and as a part of that referral process, we may negotiate that. But that's always an option. Just letting parents in general know about some of the options. In the closing session of the group, we often talk to parents about other workshops that we have available that they might find helpful, other services that might be available in their community that they might want to consider if things are difficult. So the closing session provides an opportunity to do some planning. But as always, you can speak to people individually as a therapist and try to be helpful to them in finding resources that are available.
I have a question about booster sessions. Do you offer booster sessions 6 months later, or
we used to
kind of refresh?
We used to offer booster sessions at about 6 months out, and we would invite parents back, and we would say, how are things going? And they would often say, well, this week they're going really well. Last week it was a disaster. We say, well, tell us about what you did this week. And they said, well, we knew what you were going to say. So, we started doing win-ends again. I started ignoring some stuff. And, I started looking for opportunities to praise my son. And things have settled down now. And so we thought, well, maybe we should not wait 6 months. Maybe we should have some kind of monthly boosters. And so we went to a monthly booster model. And we brought parents back. And we used the monthly boosters to work on general strategies, but also to introduce situations that we thought were important from a parenting perspective and often difficult, like homework. And so we would have a session on homework. And the parents would say, well, can I bring my neighbor along? Because they didn't take the COPE program, but they're having trouble with homework too, and I think it would be really helpful. And so we'd say, well, sure. And so we started offering these one-session boosters, but they were of broader interest. And so what we eventually did was to put a whole bunch of one-session workshops into our community. So I mentioned yesterday coping with homework, coping with bedtime, coping with sibling conflict are examples of one-session boosters, and they're really designed to be standalone workshops. So if you've been through a COPE program, you could come out to coping with sibling conflict and really tune up your problem-solving and negotiating skills, but you could come to that session as a standalone and learn some really useful things, and actually find out that this is a helpful working group format. And we say to parents at the end of that one-session format, if you found this interesting, here's some others that are available, or if you'd really want to work on your skills, there's a 10-week version of this. Uses very similar strategies that you might find helpful. So we put those one-session workshops, we run a lot of them in September, for example, and it's a way of parents are interested in bedtimes, they're interested in homework, they're interested in getting the school year started off, and so we get a lot of parents who enroll in that, and it's a way of introducing them to what large groups are like. But at the same time, at the end, say in the holiday season and in the early part of January, we run them again. So for parents who've been through the COPE course, it can act as a kind of a booster. And we have dozens and dozens of these kinds of one-session, two-session working groups that parents can take advantage of in our community. We call it the Community Education Service. But it really was the evolution of a 6-month booster into a 1-month topic-focused set of boosters, but then making those universally available in the community. Very similar, very similar. So for example, when we do the coping with sibling conflict session, we actually model the errors. We model parents dealing with conflict between kids in a very ineffective way, and then we model some alternative ways and let the group talk about the advantages and disadvantages of dealing with sibling conflict in a couple of different ways, and then we go right into practicing and role-playing. So we spend the whole 2 hours practicing those strategies, and parents will leave with actually the same skills that we teach student mediators in our school-based student mediation programs, a great set of skills. That one actually came from parents whose kids were learning to be mediators who said, you know, we ought to be learning these strategies as well. These are really very helpful. So we said, well, sure, we'll run a workshop for parents and we'll teach you the same conflict mediation strategies that we're teaching to large groups of students on the playground. And so that became one of our one-session workshops. Okay, so let's get back to if we don't have any other questions, are there one last question before we go? It's a lot more fun to talk about questions, and those are really good ones. So let's go back to finish up this session, and we left off, okay, so this is a parent who was using planning ahead strategies around telephone calls that were coming in and how to handle that a bit more effectively. What are some other situations where you could apply planning ahead strategies? Okay, so planning for the morning routine. Other examples? Okay, planning for a trip to the grocery store. Hazardous event under any circumstances. Planning ahead for a sleepover. Okay, let's take one of those. What would be an easy one to start with? What's kind of a simple one to get us going here? Planning for the morning routine? Okay, all right. All right, so let's do that. And so I'm going to need somebody who'd like to plan for the morning routine. So who can help me out here? Oh, thank you. Graduate students. Okay, so let's come over. Why don't you come over here, and we'll think about this. Okay, so how old is Sarah going to be for this planning exercise? 6? Okay, could you plan ahead with the 6-year-old? Yeah, okay, probably. You can actually probably do it with a child who's got language, expression, and comprehension skills around 4. We found it's pretty easy to do, and certainly 6. Okay, so 6-year-old we could do that. Now, we're planning ahead for the morning routine, right? Okay. And what would be a good time for me to think about sitting down and planning with Sarah? Okay, so bedtime or evening before the morning, good time? Things are quiet, calm, all right? So what should I do first? What's the first thing I should do? Or let's back up. So we'll do it just before bedtime, but where would be a good place to actually sit down and plan with her? Okay. All right. So the idea of maybe planning and coming back again. People agree with that? Young kids, you might need to talk about and plan situations several times? Okay. But where would be a good place to plan? Okay, so the morning routine is going to take place, it's going to start in the bedroom. Good place to start? People agree with that? Okay, so we'll do it right around bedtime, and we'll do it in her bedroom. Be a good place to plan. So what should I say first? What's the first thing I should say? Okay, so, yeah. All right, so let's think about tomorrow morning and what would be some helpful things that you could do, something like that. Be a good plan. Okay. Okay. So talk about what she could do to, to sort of help out with the morning routine, something like that. Okay. And is she going to remember this tomorrow morning? Okay, so I need to get her to remind herself in the morning when she wakes up. People agree with that? Okay. And supposing she does a pretty good job, she's kind of following through on a couple simple parts of her plan, what should I do then? We so praise her? Hey, you're doing a great job. Okay. What if she just kind of forgets a little thing, not a big deal? Okay, so just still look for things to focus on that are positive. What if she totally forgets the plan? It's just one ear and out the other. Okay, get her to remind herself of what that plan was. Okay, all right. Okay, okay. So all right, let's. That's probably as much as I can handle. Okay, so why don't you put that down? So you're going to be in your bedroom, and what are you doing? She's behaving well, yeah. Maybe you're reading a book. Okay? So she's in her bedroom, she's reading a book. Here we go. And Sarah, you need to remember to...
Okay, I can do both.
Good. Okay. All right, so here we go. What you reading here, Sarah?
I'm reading a storybook.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's really neat. What's happening here?
They're going on an adventure.
An adventure. Cool. Who all's going along?
Susie and her friends.
You really like to read, don't you? That's a fun thing for you to do. Yeah, you're really good at that. Now, let's just put the book down just for a second because there's something I want to talk to you about. Tomorrow morning, we're going to try to get the morning going in a good way. And so I need you to help me out. So tomorrow morning, when we're starting to get dressed, what could you do to help out?
I could put on my shirt.
Okay, great. So you could dress by yourself. That would be great. That would be a big help for me. Okay. Anything else you could do in the morning that would be helpful?
Get out of bed when you tell me.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay, fantastic. So if you can get out of bed when I tell you and get dressed, that would be so helpful. Thanks a lot. Okay, so we'll pretend like she's gone to sleep now and she's waking up in the morning and I'll come in. Morning, Sarah. How are you?
I'm sleeping.
How'd you sleep? Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. So do you remember that plan we talked about last night?
No.
What's that? What was that?
A morning plan.
Yeah, the morning plan we talked about. Some things that you could do to help out. What were those things?
Being ready for the day.
Okay, getting ready for the day, right? So that would be helpful. So what we're going to do to get ready for the day?
Put on my clothes.
Okay, get your clothes on. That's great. And there's one other thing you're going to do.
get up when you tell me.
Get out of bed. That's great. Thanks. I appreciate that. Okay, so you can go ahead and start getting dressed. Hey, it's great you're up. Great, you got up. Thanks. I appreciate that. And you got yourself dressed all by yourself. That's a big help. Thanks a lot. That's a big girl. Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, so let's stop. Okay, so what did I do first as a parent? Okay, got down to her level. What else did I do? So showed a little interest in what she was doing there, talked a little bit about the reading. Okay, what else did I do? Yes? Okay. So it kind of slowed down and gave her some time to think about it. I didn't just immediately tell her what it was that I wanted to do. Let her think about it. Okay. What else did I do? So the tone was okay? Okay. So I tried to use a gentle tone. What else?
You only focused on 2 things rather than lots of things.
So we kind of kept it a simple plan, one that a 6-year-old could probably manage. Okay. Would expect a 2-year-old to remember or kind of keep 2 things in mind for a plan? 6-year-old? Yeah? Okay. Probably. Okay. What else did I do? Okay, so I looked for opportunities to praise the suggestions that she had. Okay. There were probably some other things that I would have wanted to do, but I thought this would be a reasonable start to get started on 2 things. So look for opportunities to praise her. And so in the morning, what did I do? She got up, kind of sleepy. Okay, got her to go back and remind herself of what that plan was. Okay. And then what? Okay, so kind of tried to catch her just as she'd finished each step and praised her for that. Okay. All right. Supposing we did that around our house, and Sarah can be challenging, and we sat down and we planned for situations like the morning routine, or bedtime, or going to the store together, and we stuck to that over the next couple of months, next couple of years, looked for lots of opportunities to sit down together and talk about things. What would happen over time? What do you think would happen over time? So you think seeing some of the plans that we worked on, she'd start to kind of internalize them, do them herself without having to do this over and over and over again? People agree with that? Okay. What is she learning in taking the time to do this? Because, it'd be a lot easier just to tell her what I want her to do, but is there anything she's learning in thinking this through in this way? Okay, so she's learning some things about problem solving, about thinking situations through. Okay, so being a bit more independent, thinking things through from her own perspective. Okay, all right. So she's finding out some things that are important to me that in the morning. All right. It did make me happy. Okay, so let's let's get out of role here. So that's kind of the idea, and if we were modeling this, we would go back to a second situation and a third situation. The second role play is a little bit faster because parents have worked it through, and the third one is often quick again. So that's the idea, is to model it. Now, as a leader, there may be things that parents don't suggest when you're setting it up. So, for example, sometimes parents don't suggest that you take some time to show interest in kids prior to starting that. So, as a leader, you can add those things. You're not stuck just with what the parents suggest. And parents may leave a little bit of a step out as a group, and you can certainly model that. So you want to model as close to a good strategy as possible. You don't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be fantastic. You just want to try to model some basic strategies and then model them again and then model them again to be as repetitive as possible. And you need to make sure that you get your role-playing kids to keep it simple and behave yourself, because again, you're dealing with teaching just a basic strategy here, and you're not really into dealing with noncompliance and arguments and other kinds of things yet. So try to keep the situation simple. Parents will try to make it complex so that it's more like what they're dealing with at home. You need to try to keep it simple just for the purposes of teaching basic strategies. Okay. Now, as these sessions as we move on, we get to strategies that are a little bit more complicated for parents to learn and remember. And this is a difficult strategy. You have to think about a situation that you could plan for. You need to think about when would it be a good time to plan. You need to think about where would it be a good time to plan. You need to think about what you would say as a parent. You need to think about how to follow up with some kind of a reminder. You need to think about how to use rewards. So pulling this kind of a strategy off requires some thought and practice. And so the homework planning sheet for this session is a little bit more complicated. It gives parents a chance to think this through in a little bit more depth. And in working out a plan on paper during this part of it, the parents have a chance to create a little script, if you would, that they can use during role playing. They can just kind of read it off. And so you need to basically have this one set up in your head in a little bit more depth. So here's what we're going to do during this next stage. So does everyone have a homework planning sheet and a pencil? Okay, great. We got a pencil, homework planning sheet. What I'd like you to do in your groups is talk about, as a group, start with some different situations where you could use planning ahead. There was a parent on the tape was planning ahead for phone calls, and we were planning ahead for the morning routine and planning ahead for a trip to the grocery store and planning ahead for bedtime routine. So think of some different situations where it might be helpful to plan ahead, and talk about that as a group, and each of you write them down. And just try to see if you can find 10 different situations. But then what I'd like you to do is each go on and individually work out a specific plan for a planning ahead situation. And what I want you to do is to think about when to plan ahead. We did it at bedtime here. Might be in the morning before school. Kids get home in the afternoon. If you're planning ahead about how to approach homework, think about where to plan ahead. We sat down in a quiet place, bedroom, at a quiet time when things were relaxed. So think about where. And then write down what you'll say. I'm expecting an important phone call in the afternoon. What could you do to help out? So what exactly will you say? And then think about when you're going to prompt them so they'll remember. We did it in the morning as soon as Sarah woke up. Sarah, what was that plan that we talked about last night? And she had to kind of wake up and think about that for a few minutes. And think about how to reward kids if they follow through. So when Sarah followed through on her plan, I said, it's great, you've gotten dressed. So we want you to work it through in detail here. Where to plan, when to plan, what you're going to say, and so forth. Think about what you do for minor errors. So sometimes if I were planning ahead for a phone call and got a little bit noisy, maybe I would just ignore that. If it's clear that kids have completely forgotten the plan, then we might stop and say, hey, what was that plan that you had? And see if they can remember it, try to get them to remind themselves. And then again, how to reward them at the end. So we want you to think through these examples. You're just going to pretend like it for a few minutes in some depth. Got the idea? Okay, so go ahead. Start by talking about some different situations where planning ahead might be useful. Okay, just another minute. I'm just going to move us along so that we finish up by lunch. So just take a couple of minutes and then we'll come back together as a large group. Okay, let's come back together as a large group. I would give you clearly more time for this, but just so that we can finish in time for lunch, I'm going to move us along. So let's start with this group. We'll start with this group, and again, let me hear just from the subgroup leaders, just one person at a time. What was one of the situations where your group thought you could use planning ahead strategies?
Well, we all agreed that right before getting home from school was
Okay. Okay, so that transition from school to home would be a good chance to plan? People agree on that? Okay. This group, Monica, different situation? Okay, if you're going to a restaurant, might be a time to sit down with kids and plan. Could you do this with more than one child if you were going as a family? Would you plan together as a family? Okay. This group, a different situation? Okay, so you're going on a long trip, okay? Driving from Canada to Miami. People do that. Okay, so planning for a long car trip. People agree that might be a good one to plan for? Okay, this group? Okay, planning for going to church? Okay. And I'd probably go around again a couple of times just to hear a lot of different examples, because you think about it and you think, well, yeah, that's actually a good situation. I hadn't thought about that. So parents will get a lot of ideas, and next parent that's going to the restaurant or going to church, they're going to think about that. They'll remember the group said that would be a good opportunity to plan ahead, and that'll be a reminder to them. So pretend like you had enough time to actually work through the specifics of a planning ahead situation. So just pretend that you do that. So let me just ask in each group, just an example of one situation where a parent planned ahead for. Monica, what was one of the situations in your group that people actually worked out a plan for? Okay, so well in advance, maybe the night before. Okay. And at the dinner table, sounded like? And then remind them on the way, like just before you get there? Okay, so remind them. And if it looks like they've forgotten what the plan was in the restaurant? Okay. Okay, all right, okay. And so that's the idea. And so we try to get a couple of examples. Great spontaneous. You're good on your feet. Monica's a sociable member, isn't she? So we would try to get some examples of that so that to make this as concrete as possible. This, again, will be a new strategy for a lot of parents. There are elements of it that we've worked on in the COPE program up until this point in time. But again, the idea of shifting and giving kids a chance to get involved in thinking through situations is something that for some parents will be fairly new. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is, I would have gone around and listened to each of the groups. The next thing we're going to do is some practice. So what I need you to do is each pick a partner that you can work with for the next exercise. So partners, maybe the three of you could, several people to plan with. Here, okay, here and here, okay. Partners, okay, and here partners. Okay, 2 kids, great. Now, so in each group, who's going to be the parent? So parents here. Okay, Monica, is it reluctant parents? Parent here? Okay, parent, 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 and parent, yes, sir. Okay, all right, so who are the kids? Raise your hands. Okay. Remember, again, this is a kind of a behavioral momentum. We're kind of easing people into a situation that's sometimes a little bit uncomfortable to do. So we're going at this in very small steps. Okay, now, who are the parents again? What I'd like you to do is take a look at this example that you developed, because this is the one I want you to practice. And so you've written out a script here of what you can actually say. So that's what you're going to do. So you can just read this off like a play and just say, I'm expecting an important phone call this afternoon. What could you do to help out? So I just want you to kind of read it off and walk down through it. So talk about it just for a situation with the person who's going to be your kid or your kids if you've got more than one, and just tell them the situation. We're going to a restaurant. We're going to plan ahead here. So just take about a minute to talk about what you're going to be doing. Okay? And then raise your hand when you're ready. Don't start yet. Just don't start. Just raise your hand when you're ready. Okay, so just pretend like you've had a minute and you've got the situation ready. Okay, you ready? Okay, so get up and find a comfortable spot, but don't start yet. Just spread out around the room. And everybody get up and move away from your tables. We'll move over here then. No. Okay. Everybody ready? Why did I try to get each of you to get out of your chairs? What was the reason I did that? Okay, it generates some energy. It loosens people up. If you move around a little bit, it's just easier. If parents sit at their tables, it's just a little bit more uncomfortable for them. So we just want people to get up and move around. So I asked this group just to move over to a different side of the table. So that's the reason, is again, just to relax parents and make it a little bit easier and give them a chance to spread out. Now, who are the parents? Okay, so just pretend like you have your homework planning sheet in front of you, and so you're going to use that and read it off. We won't have enough time to do an entire exercise, but you would just kind of work your way down through this. And who are the kids? Okay, those of you who are kids, I want you to help your parent out, okay? When they say, what are some things you could do to help out? Think of some ideas. Don't make it difficult for parents. Try to make it a situation where they're successful. All right, so when you're ready, just go ahead and walk through the situation, and when you're finished, just raise your hand. Go ahead. Put your seatbelt on. Okay, raise your hand when you're finished. Okay, I'd give you a little bit more time to do this, but not too much. Okay, those of you who are the kids, tell your parent a couple things that you thought they did well. Had a nice tone of voice. It was nice that you gave me an opportunity to participate in the discussion. Reward was really nicely done. So tell them a few things that you thought they did well. Give them some positive feedback. Okay, and come back to your tables. Come on back. Okay. We would just reverse this now and just have everybody switch, and those of you who are the parents first time would be a kid, and those of you who are the kids, you'd now be a parent, and you'd walk right back through that. And you can learn from thinking the situation through yourself and practicing a little bit as a parent. You'll also learn from listening to somebody else practice those strategies. So this is just a chance for parents to think about a situation, to work out some of the details, to think about exactly what they were going to do and say, and hopefully to have a chance to practice that a little bit. One of the things the kids group leaders, if the kids are in the kids group, would have been doing tonight is, they would have been doing for the entire session, is a lot of planning ahead. They would have planned ahead in each session of the kids group, probably several times. So when parents say, what could you do to help out? It'll be a strategy that's familiar to kids, and they will have gotten comfortable with doing that. So the last thing we're going to do is homework. So does everyone have a homework sheet like this? Great, okay. Usually we just turn over the homework planning sheet and it's on the other side. So homework sheets, great. Pencils? Buddy got a pencil? Okay. What I'd like you to do is to write down some situations where you could practice planning ahead at your house this week. Maybe for bedtime, maybe for a trip to the grocery store, maybe for a trip to church. But think about a situation where you could practice planning ahead. And keep in mind that this is an opportunity for you just to practice and get more comfortable with these strategies. So don't expect that it's necessarily going to go perfectly. So write down some situations where you can practice. And where have people been posting your your homework sheets so you see them and they act as a good reminder to you?
Everywhere.
Okay.
I make copies.
Okay, so you get some copies. And
I have one in the fridge. I have one in my planner and in my
fantastic. Okay. Other ideas about where to put homework planning sheets? On your computer. Okay. Good one. Now, what we'd like you to do this week is try to find as many opportunities as you can to practice planning ahead. So look for as many opportunities as you can and try it out and just try to get some experience with it. And each time you do, check off the opportunity to practice and bring that back. Now, some of you, I know your partners weren't able to be here. What have people found is a helpful way of sharing what we've been working on here with your partners? Okay, so maybe sitting down at a meal like breakfast and talking about it? Okay, so maybe making a few notes about what you've been working on and emailing it? Okay. Now, whose kids are here tonight in the kids group? Is there any way you could use planning ahead on the way home tonight? Any ideas about that? What would you do? What would be?
I'm using a taxi.
What would be a good way? Any thoughts about how to do that?
Discuss the evening routine in the car on the ride home and then exit that night so that they don't have as much opportunity there.
Okay, so you could plan ahead for the routine when you get home, and then you'd have a chance to practice it immediately? Okay, good example. Those of you whose kids aren't in the kids group, what's the first chance that you'll get to practice these strategies? Okay, as soon as you get home? Okay. Plan for bedtime maybe, if kids are still up. Somebody, I think Luther is somebody, so who's missing tonight? Luther's here. Who's missing? Oh, David's missing. That's right. That's right. Okay. Did anybody see Dave? Okay. Well, maybe you could tell him we missed him, and we hope to see him next week. And we've got actually a homework planning sheet that if you see him, if you could share with him, that'd be helpful. You know what we've been working on. Okay. So. We'll see you next week at 7 o'clock. I'll go let the kids group leaders know that we've finished for the evening. So thanks very much. Out we go. Okay, all right, so that finishes the session. We have a couple minutes? Okay, so if there are any questions that you have about this session or any session or anything at all that we've talked about. Sarah?
I have a question. I was wondering if you recommend to parents that they come up with specific plans for every potential situation, or if there's a way to maybe generalize a plan, like talk about getting ready and being ready on time and then making that appropriate for the evening and the morning, or going out to go to church in the morning.
What do people think? What's a co-group leader going to do here? Encourage parents to develop very specific or a general one? This is an example of a situation where it's very individual. If I had a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old that was pretty bright and highly motivated, then they probably could infer some underlying principles in that. But if I had a 6-year-old child who was impulsive and poorly regulated and had difficulty in situations, then we might really have to work on very concrete plans for specific situations. The likelihood that they would generalize the elements of a plan across situations would be my guess is much more limited. So probably depends upon the age of kids, probably depends upon their temperament, probably depends upon the nature of the house. If you've got a well-structured and organized house, a relatively small family, maybe it's easier to do, but if you've got a larger family and a lot of people and different schedules, then you might have to do more of this. You know, kids usually really like sitting down with parents, and they like parents to listen to their ideas, and it's a highly reinforcing situation. So from my perspective, it's a lovely relationship building activity, and it's one that I'd want to do more often than not, just for that purpose. That's just speaking personally as a parent.
I fear that Canadians are more reserved than Americans, and that some of the strategies like breaking eye contact or just walking to the back of the room will work better in Canada, and I can say that because I am Canadian. So I'm just wondering, can you tell about the group processes and if they've differed, like in New York or in Miami? Because I know you've had experience with COPE being run in different places. So
Yes.
just kind of like cultural differences on people's comfort or breaking in or trying to pull the leader into a group discussion, or letting you walk to the back of the room without trying to interrupt you or trying to pull you back or that sort of thing.
That's a really good question. It's I remember a psychologist at Syracuse who ran the COPE program in that community used to talk about the third minute revolt in New York. So there is a sense that I think he was just being funny about it, but there was a sense that people were more assertive and more likely to challenge the leader in that context. I think there are cultural differences, but the fundamental, to me, the fundamental issue in groups that really does cut across a lot of cultures is that people do not like to be told what to do. And they like to express their own views about parenting, and they like to develop their own solutions. And I think across cultures, that's a kind of a cultural universal. But there are, there are enormous variations in the personality of groups. This has been a really positive, respectful, easy to work with group. Some groups are a bit more contentious. Some groups are quiet. Some groups they're just distressed. They've got difficult kids. So groups have a personality, and it seems to me that within Hamilton, there's more variation in the personality of groups than there are across cultural differences. So definitely differences in the feel of individual groups. They do take on a personality of their own. And maybe some little cultural differences, but not big ones. Because I do think that people do like the opportunity to express their views about things, particularly things like parenting, which are so important.
This is another question about culture and differences. You mentioned that some of the groups that you've worked with on reservations, they have the permeating value of respect for children. And I'm wondering, if there might be other cultural groups that actually sort of come down on, a more extreme on the other side, that children are to be seen but not heard, and they are expected to be compliant, and they are to show me respect, rather, and that this kind of this thing of, you're going to talk to them and you're going to attend to them. I have gotten pushback in my past career to hear parents, say, well, that's a white thing, or that's not a, we don't, in Haiti, what was that somebody said? Oh, sorry, that was David yesterday. They gave an example of one of his, groups that he had done with a Haitian group, and a comment that was made that was pretty severe and extreme in terms of harsh view of expectations for children. And I just wonder, how does that, do you find that this can still work its way with groups that may have a permeating view of children and their place?
Yes. I think there are clearly cultural differences in views about parenting, about the roles of fathers and mothers, about the nature of the relationship between kids and parents, and but again, the permeating principle, it seems to me, is that parents want to have a chance to talk about this, and if you say, if you try to push a particular perspective about parenting at parents that's very different from their beliefs, you're gonna get a lot of pushback. But if you give parents a chance to talk about it and to think about situations and look at what happened on the tape and talk about what the consequences of that are, and think about some alternative strategies and think about what the advantages of that are, and kind of arrive at a consensus, then I think it's a lot easier for folks to change. And that's, I think, even within, I mean, Canada we're an enormously, like much of the United States, an enormously multicultural country, and we've run the COPE program in lots and lots and lots and lots of different areas and different groups. And having done parent training program from a more direct point of view early in my career, in the way that Cunningham first introduced it, and having over the years gradually shifted to more of a problem-based program, the problem-solving approach just works much, much better in different cultural groups. I think that's true for everybody's here because they want to be the best parent that they have. Yeah. But I think that's an important part of this kind of a program. It's an opportunity for parents to talk about parenting, to look at some different ways, to think about the advantages and disadvantages, to hear from other parents, and then to arrive at a decision about what makes most sense for them. And it's remarkable in cultures really all over the world how close to the same strategies parents come when they have an opportunity to express it in that way. Okay. Yeah, those are really interesting issues. One of the things that's kind of interesting is we've sometimes talked about is whether it would be better to have a COPE group in a particular community for people from that culture, or more of a heterogeneous group. And I can remember running a group many years ago, and there was a parent, and she was, I don't know where she was from, someplace in Eastern Europe, and she was a relatively recent immigrant, and there were some parents from Ancaster, the community where I live, and they were talking about just how it was kind of during the social phase of the group, and they were talking about how difficult their kids were, and it was so stressful being a parent, and she was kind of listening. She said, "Well, if you didn't want to be miserable, why'd you have kids?" So, but there's a perspective that all cultures bring wisdom and experience, especially older cultures. They bring a lot of really important attitudes and views, and so I've always liked mixed groups where parents have a chance to listen to each other. I've always wished that some of the discussions that I've heard on the Six Nations Reserve about parenting, that other parents in other parts of our community were party to hear those, because they're really moving, and it's an important perspective. So I kind of like mixed groups where parents can explore these views, they can talk about different perspectives, they have a chance to listen to different cultural beliefs about this. So, and I do believe that each culture brings wisdom and value to the task of parenting. Yes?
How do you find that unity, I guess, that unity of we're all here because we want our children to do better? How do you find that works with parents who don't necessarily want to be in the group? They're by some court mandate or spouse mandate or things of that nature. Like they don't necessarily really want to be there, but they're going to go through it anyway.
That is, I think, a really good point. And we have groups where we have court mandated parents who are participating. They're participating because they don't really have a choice. And I think I mentioned yesterday that they're angry and they're suspicious, and it's difficult for them. All I can say is that if we had to approach them directly and tell them, this is what you're doing, it's wrong, this is how you need to do it, a more didactic approach, I think we would encounter a lot of resistance. But a group in which they have a chance to participate in a discussion and express their views, and where you have a group of other parents that can influence their views, it's much, much easier to accomplish change in that context. So it's always a challenge to work with those families. We have for many years. We think that this has been helpful, certainly not the entire solution to their difficulties. But I think a process that is respectful of parents' views and uses a problem-solving approach elicits less of the resistance and pushback that you inevitably get, that you get from most parents if you take a more direct approach.